We've just left Malindi, a coastal town in eastern Kenya, and are heading inland to the Shakahola forest. In March, news broke that a woman had killed her children here in order to please God. When the story broke, Joseph Yeri was one of the first journalists at the scene.
We were first called here by the police. We were informed that there were two bodies of children buried inside here. Instead, we found bodies all over, mass graves all over.
To date, more than 350 bodies and counting have been exhumed. They were all led to the forest by a televangelist named Paul Mackenzie. He is thought to have told them that the world was ending and that in order to reach God, they would have to starve themselves to death. First children, then women, then men. Mackenzie said he would follow, but he never did. So tell me about Paul Mackenzie. What do we know about him?
Initially, he was a taxi driver in Malindi until he formed his own ministry now called Good News International Ministries. That church, according to the believers who first went in, was just a good church. Miracles happened until 2015. Now, when he became a televangelist, a pastor, the message started changing. He started introducing the issue to do with prophecies, and all these prophecies were broadcasted live on television.
Tell me about Mackenzie's followers, those that followed him into this forest.
They came from far and wide because Mackenzie had followers all over.
So presumably many of those people would never have heard of Paul Mackenzie were it not for his TV channel.
Correct.
There's still an estimated 600 of Paul Mackenzie's followers who are still missing in Shakahola Forest. One of them is a woman named Pamela Mukulasinga. She's from Bungoma. It's a county in northwest Kenya, the opposite end of the country, nearly 1,000 kilometers from here. We've managed to find her son. He's living in Nairobi, so I'm off to the capital to meet him. Televangelism is the use of media to communicate Christianity. The televangelists in Kenya often claim that they can perform miracles.
I stand against those powers now.
Deliver spiritual healing and guarantee prosperity. Typically in the exchange for donations, which have made some televangelists very wealthy and influential. For some viewers, often the most vulnerable, the promise beamed directly into their homes of divine intervention by these pastors proves irresistible.
Paul Mackenzie is what we would refer to as a charismatic authority.
Tutakaa na Mungu wetu milele na milele. Tupumzike taabu ya mateso ya dunia hii.
Because in order to be a televangelist, in order to hold the attention of an audience, no matter how big or small, you have to have a particular kind of charisma.
Comparing to other African televangelists, you can tell that the rest of the African televangelists tend to go the prosperity way, and Paul Mackenzie goes the mystical way.
Bwana kaniuliza, unajua ni kwa nini siku ya leo ndo mbona maiti hawafufuki kama nilivyofufua?
When mystery kicks in, then somebody is believed to have information or news or power that other people don't have. And so that occultic, mystical element is what really endeared him to a lot of people.
Pamela Mukalasinga's son, Rogers Shibuse, says that she would spend her days watching Mackenzie's Times TV channel and was captivated by his sermons that promised spiritual healing. She thought he could help her daughter, who was suffering from mental health issues. This time last year, Shibuse's mother, his sister, and her 3-year-old daughter left home to join the televangelist.
Okay. The
main reason my mother followed Mackenzie's preaching was my elder sister's illness. During his TV sermons, Mackenzie would often use the Bible and a specific oil to heal people, so my mother thought he might be able to help my sister. That was her main motivation. If it wasn't for his TV station, my mother never would have heard of someone like Mackenzie.
When religion comes under the agency of media, then media transforms that religion. And so perhaps for people like Paul Mackenzie, media tended to give them some kind of reputation and credibility.
Sifurahiki kazi inayoendelea Ruiru tangu nimewaacha. Je, Mungu?
Paul Mackenzie's message would have first started out as what we would consider an instance of religious diversity, right? Because it doesn't just start off as an end of times. We then see it moving into a space of deviance.
Education is evil.
And then later on we see it moving into a space of danger.
Lakini shetani amedhihirika katika roho ya uke zaidi. Hallelujah.
Now, it's difficult to predict what the progression will be, because not all diverse iterations of a mainstream religion will become deviant, and not all deviant iterations of a mainstream religion will become dangerous, but sometimes they do.
The question now is, at what point should the Kenyan authorities have intervened? And could they have done so while upholding Mackenzie's constitutional right to freedom of thought and religion? The Communications Authority is the body responsible for regulating broadcast media in the country. This past April, it suspended Mackenzie's TV channel, but only after the Shakahola story had broken. And even then, it was mostly for administrative non-compliance. Little of the content it reviewed broke the rules. I asked the Director General how his organization monitors this kind of content.
We use a system that logs the information. But when you have 320 TV stations, for you to make sense of that content, the technology we have is that somebody has to sit down and listen through or watch to be able to conclude the nature of that particular content. That's why the complaint mechanism is much better. If somebody sees something unbecoming, then they're able to report, then we can now go specifically to track down that specific broadcaster.
The problem I see with that mechanism is that you are relying on viewer feedback, but often the viewers of these channels are the people that are being radicalized.
Yeah.
Do you not see that as an issue in this system?
It's really a problem, but then our responsibility is not to regulate content of a theological nature unless it's so obvious on the face of it. Content that we looked at, we did not see a direct link with the massacre.
Do you not think that, yes, there may not be a direct link to Shakahola, but that problematic content, the miracles and the prosperity preachings,
Yeah.
do you not think that needs to be regulated?
You know, the trouble with the issues of religion and faith is exactly that, faith. And that's why when you allow freedom of religion, is to just allow people to make sense of life in the way they see best. So the risk of going that route is that you end up being a policeman in people's conscience. But that balance has to be struck. And that's a really big challenge for us.
Paul Mackenzie is now in jail and faces multiple charges. But the media environment in which he thrived and the constitutional rights that protected him remain the same. Kenya is 85% Christian, and televangelists wield enormous influence. So politicians, wanting to stay in power, are unlikely to challenge the hegemony of these TV pastors and their armies of faithful followers, even if that leaves an untold number of vulnerable people at risk.
So mwezi wa tatu nikatoka hapa Nairobi nikaenda Malindi.
I left Nairobi for Malindi to search for my mother. When I got there, I found one of Mackenzie's followers who had been rescued. They told me they had seen my mother and my sister. My sister and her child had been tied up until they died and were buried. Having seen all this, my mother ran deep into the forest. I had been trying to find her ever since, but to this day, nothing.